the way you see the world, try to put it on paper. Don't try to do it like whoever your favorite artist is. Do it the way you see it, and you'll have a long career if that's what you choose.
I think it's funny that that is a comment that you get regularly, like Bloodstorm traumatized people.
At first, I didn't get it, and then as everything as you get older, it starts making sense because when I started reading comics, the ones that got me traumatized me, and I never thought that I would be a traumatizer as well. I always thought people reading it were like at my age at that time or older, and it just sort of disconnected that there were it was anyone younger doing or anyone not exposed to that kind of material. I just was used to it from when I grew up. In a good way, that's a nice compliment to hear. you know.
What were some of the comics that, that traumatized you, I
Oh,
guess?
easily. Monster of Frankenstein by Mike Plug. There was some really horrific stuff in those. Obviously, Wein and Wrightson's Swamp Thing, the Unmen just did me in. I was a big fan of Richard Corbin's work in Warren Comics, so there was a lot of really upsetting material that I enjoyed every second of, and I kept going back to it. And I mean, I would buy the regular comics, and but I would buy those with probably even more interest. All of those kind of things were wonderful. I just now, it's one of those things that after time I realized I was in that other comics thing. I was in there's the regular comics and then there's the other comics, and I'm in the other comics grouping.
I love that Bloodstorm actually kind of looks more like a Batman bootleg comic, and I mean that in the best way.
No,
Like
I
it's not house style at all, and I think that's
no,
what you know.
no, and I'll be honest with you, not that the intent was to not be that, but the intent was kind of to just go off and do this. It's kind of a thing I started to do where when I would get a story like that, act like I had just invented this character. And so I didn't go into it thinking of all the other people who had done Batman. I thought of it like if they came to me and proposed designing a character. That's a freedom then at that point. I mean, I didn't go to change it. I went to interpret it as I thought it would look. And as I thought it would be, Batman in the vampire books, well, Batman's already pretty frightening when he's not a vampire. So it had to go further. And they just let me go on that. They just said, do your thing. But I've always kept Batman as like, well, I invented him. Not like I own him, not like I do him the best. It's just I invented him because I love so many different versions. I really enjoyed Neil Adams. I loved Marshall Rogers. I really enjoyed Matt Wagner's. I mean, there were Frank Miller's was wonderful. They're great, and but they've already done it, so you can't just go and do that. You have to come up with your own.
Did the Elseworlds, I guess, imprint give you freedom to do that? Because it's not you have to do a house style Batman. You can be a little bit more weird and
They
free with
hadn't
it.
really developed, I twice in my career I was doing Sandman before they called it Vertigo, and I was doing this before they called it an Elseworld. And I think when they got to a halfway point, they said, we got to call it something because they also had Alan Grant and Simon Bisley doing Batman Judge Dredd at the same time. So there were these couple of these, what they would kind of call out of canon stories. I remember that it started as just a graphic novel of Batman turns into this. And then they said, well, we got to give it like some kind, let people know that this isn't canon. As it turned out later on, they made it canon. But at the time we did it, which was a very freeing thing. Once you know you're not trapped by something, you can do all kinds of disastrous things to the character and explore more to the character. And Doug always wrote it as a true Gothic story, meaning not so much how it looks or whatever, but Gothic in the sense that it ends the way it does. You know, all the objectives are gotten, all of his goals are achieved, but everybody's gone. That was his intent, and he did a great job. I mean, I remember reading it just on the page, and it was pretty powerful.
What did his scripts look like? Did they give you room to do your own thing as well?
Oh yeah, he came from what they call Marvel style, which is a plot with some sentences in it, kind of describing occasionally what they would be saying or whatever, which lent itself to a lot of interpretation as to the visuals. He never said, for example, Batman as he changes becomes more skeletal or more ugly. Basically, he just wrote it as he becomes a vampire. And however I wanted to do that, and I had thought naturally he should look worse than Dracula. He should be more frightening. Whatever Dracula did, he would do one better wearing this his costume. So Doug was fine with it. I sent when the moment they said Elseworld, we're going to call this an Elseworld. The editors lightened up too. I think they just said, okay, whatever you do, you do. No one knew that it would be successful. I think they did it in well, I know they did it in order to make Doug happy. Doug was working there. Doug had this idea in mind. I give him all the credit in the world for seeing something possible with Batman that no one else had seen. And that was to do something like this. Elseworlds became a big thing after Red Rain. The possibilities, it wasn't like, let's replicate that exact thing. It was, well, there's a lot of possibilities. And that I squarely give credit to Doug Moench and Denny O'Neil for going with that. Those two said, well, why not? And I was just lucky to be there.
And I mean, I know Deadman isn't a character who's as popular as Batman. I
No.
don't know about you. I have a soft spot for like kind of the more like esoteric ones, but it's like it's a horror love story, or at
Yeah.
least love after death. Like that was
Yes,
one
it
of those
is.
ones where it's like this is Deadman to me now. It's like no more of like the clean cut. I want the hip bones and everything poking out
Yeah.
and just nightmarish, but it's like
I,
endearing at the same time.
you know, again, when they had said, here's they didn't really know I did horror then. So when they gave me the assignment, the first thing that happens is, oh my God, the only person who's really done this great was Neil Adams. And as with Batman, you have to get out of the shadow of Neil Adams because everything will be compared to him. So the best way to be compared to him is to try not to be compared to him in that way. You can be in the sense like, oh my God, what did he do to Deadman? He ruined it. That's fine. That one I don't mind, but not like, yeah, it's good, but it's just, Neil Adams, and that's what you don't want. You don't want that. Even though I would agree, I love Neil Adams Deadman. So it was the first day I drew a page of it, I didn't like it because I didn't have an angle. The next day I got up and I looked at the page and it just was rotten. I don't even know if it was good. It was just rotten. That's when it hit me. It was just like, dead man. He's a dead man. And he's a ghost, so I don't have to follow physics. He can float around. He can do whatever. And he can subtly change. Not drastically, but subtly. And that he looks this way is because he's forced to interact in our world, but he can't be in our world. And that would be like I don't know, kind of like the old Lon Chaney Wolfman movies. He's there, but he knows he's a monster. Well, he's here, he's a ghost, he can't interact, and that would begin to affect how he looks. Like if you're an alcoholic or if you're something where it just wears on you, and since it's a physical, that in the physical world that would happen, in the psychic world, in the ghost world, it might even be more dramatic. And it just then drew itself from that moment on. It just came really very easily, because drawing comics or drawing in general or anything like that, it's the idea. It's not the technical skills. Those don't really matter. That's the irony, is you begin to realize they don't matter. It's the ideas that do. If you got a great idea, people will follow you along. And a great idea doesn't mean everyone has to love it, but it does mean they realize something's happening. Something like something sincere is kind of happening. And that's why Deadman still, to this day, DC lets me do that. They don't mind me because they have identified that as my version of doing it is fine for me. Same way with Batman, they just let me do that. And I'm grateful to them because, if they said no, I get it.
Has there been anything that they've, shot down? Or at least that you can talk about?
Oh, actually, no. I think once they realize you're kind of a stylist in that sense, and that's how they term me. I thought of myself as a comic book artist. I still am trying to do that. But I think they saw me as like, well, you bring in Kelley, that's what he does. I try not to let that affect me to like now I have to do something. But I try to let it affect me to say, okay, I can go off into different directions. When I did Swamp Thing with Len Wein, he let me do all these weird transitional things with Swamp Thing. And because I'm not going to improve on that. I'm not going to improve on Wrightson or Bissett's version. But what I can do is bring something that you haven't seen him do and do it along those lines. And Len loved that. He thought that brought something to it. And that gives you a lot of latitude, a lot of freedom to kind of explore stuff in the drawing. I mean, not just accomplish what the script is asking, but to bring something to a reader that they haven't seen or uh, kind of a sincere take.
Yeah, I mean, you were talking about reading Len Wein's books
Yeah.
and, the original Swamp Thing and getting
Yeah.
traumatized by that. What was that conversation like where it's like, hey, do you want to work on Swamp Thing now?
It was as shocking a thing as you can because I was 12 years old when I came across it. And my entire comic book world had been shifted by Swamp Thing issue 2. Because I was reading comics, but I didn't know who was making them. I just, hey, it's Captain America. I'll read a Captain America. Hey, it's the Avengers. Hey, it's, whatever. When I came across that in a stack of books given to me, it wasn't like I went and bought it. It was just, here's some books. And I remember really not liking it because it scared me. I mean, the Unmen still work for me. They're really creepy. And the hero is creepy. It was such an atmospheric book. I hadn't seen a book I didn't have the terms in, but inked and colored like that. I hadn't seen one like they're all bright, they're all clean lines and force and everything. And this was dark and gritty and rendered and horrible. So I didn't like it. And then about 2 hours later, I went back because it was bothering me. This thing, it was like Pandora's box of you got to look, or the Hydra, you have to look. It was a different reaction then. And it was like, this is wonderful. And that's the first time I went back and looked, who made this? What people would think of this? How did, it didn't look human. It didn't look like people could make this. And I became a fan at that moment. And I told Len Wein that when we first spoke. And he loved that story. He made me tell that story to him several times. To him, and I understand this, to anyone creative, if someone comes to you and says, I didn't like your stuff at first, but now I really do, is a huge compliment. It means they get it, they stuck with it, they gave it a shot, and then it became an acquired taste or whatever the term is. And I said, well, I didn't know who you were, but you're the first writer I knew because I went back to see who did this. It was amazing. I had I think Doug mentioned him both were guys who wrote most of the comics I loved growing up. So I used to always interrupt them and ask a nerd question. I'd always ask Doug about Master of Kung Fu, or I loved his Godzilla comics. And the same went with Len. I just loved what he had done. And so I would always ask him. They both had great memories. They could remember everything. So it was tougher to do it with Denny O'Neil because he always had something to do. But those guys, they would let me ask a couple questions. It was great.
Was that last Swamp Thing run one of the last books that Len Wein
It was the
put
last
out?
thing he worked on. It's the
Yeah.
very, very last thing he had done. And DC, the sad part, though I think it's good, he was a very ill man, but DC had approved it to be a regular series. The miniseries had done extremely well. I think it shocked DC, it did, because it was more Len's view than Alan's view. Like Len said, Alan did his, I got to do what I did. And it did extremely well. And so they came to him and they said, yeah, they would do another one. And he started writing it, and then he just became more increasingly ill. At one point, I said, well, if you want, just describe to me the plot. I'll take notes and describe the plot, type them up, and submit them to DC. And we'll go from there. And then you can just balloon as you want, just dialogue as you want.
Go Marvel method with it.
Yeah, well, that's how Len wrote too. Len wrote
Yeah.
like Doug. They both came out of Marvel, and that was just how they did it. So it's an easier way to do it. He was having he just never had the energy due to his condition. The last time I spoke with him, he was extremely happy with the fact they approved it, that they were just waiting for him. Len always say, I'll be fine. And whether he thought so or not, but he would say that. And I drew what I had. I gave him at least what he could ask me on the phone. But he died where he wanted. He loved doing comics. I mean, he loved it. So um he would say, even at his age, that they would approve a character, one that he invented a long time ago, as a new monthly. That was wonderful for him.
I don't want to make it sound like really corny and like fanboy and rose-colored glasses, but it is kind of poetic in a way. It's like a character that he, came up with, and then that was like the last thing. It's like kind of like the swan song.
Yeah, I think he had told me it was the most fun he'd had in 25 years doing that series. And I think it's what you said. He knew the character. He enjoyed writing those stories, that it had become successful on its own merits. Yeah, it was. That was a weird, strange year for me, because it's like I said, when I was 12 years old, I discovered both he and Wrightson, and in both cases, I did the last work with both of them. I finished, Len's last job being Swamp Thing, and Wrightson's Frankenstein series. And that was all within the same few months. That was a strange, incredibly bizarre year, because both, Bernie had asked me to finish it because he said he was retiring, and then you realize retiring means he just, medically they were saying what his condition was, and it wasn't going to happen. With Len, a few months later, that was a bad year, but again, as you said, kind of poignant in a way. And for me, the fact that both their last jobs I finished and they published was strange. That was strange.
You're talking about not liking certain people's work, not liking, but it was weird. You talked about it like it was a car crash, and you know, you hear that about Jack Kirby a lot. Like my first comics were the original Fantastic Four issues,
Yeah.
and it's one of those things where it's like tastes change.
But I think what happens is, it's not for me that I dislike it. I'm from the school that I begin to appreciate it more. Kirby's Fantastic Four was the first comics I always say, Kirby made me a fan of comics. Wein and Wrightson made me want to do comics. But I'm still the first guy more than the second guy in my head. I'm still that first fan long before I become professional. I don't even think of myself that way. So when I would read Kirby, I still feel we're all, to quote Jim Steranko, no matter what age, no matter what time you look at Kirby, he's still 10 years ahead of everybody. It's that amazing. And I don't say that out of platitudes. It's like, I look at it now and I go, how did he do this? This is just really amazing amount of, in one Kirby comic, you can get enough ideas for a year's worth of regular comics as they do them now. They're just, Jesus, he must have been electric to be around when he was working.
And it's like I mean, you said it, you summed it up perfectly. It's like what they would do in an issue of those early Fantastic Four issues. Each issue was a new idea, and then it's like these days it would take 6 issues or something to do.
I know, and I think you would have driven Kirby crazy at that slow snail's pace of storytelling as it is. Steve Ditko was the same way. You read those old Spider-Mans he did. I think those might be the best comics ever made, just by how much happens, how interesting it is. It works on every level, whether you're just reading it for the soap opera aspect of how things are going to work out in his life, or the superhero part. They work. And so much happens in each issue that it's almost overwhelming now. I tell people, if you read those, you better, it's not like you read a comic book now and you're just through it. This takes a while, but it is delicious. I reread those from time to time, and they make you giddy. They're so good.
There are certain things that happen. It's a fictional character, but when he graduates, it's one of those things that you feel it.
Yeah, you do.
Like you feel that it's like you're watching someone grow up. And when he
I think
graduates and he can't see Liz Allen anymore, it's just like that's a very real feeling.
I agree. And when you see issue 33, where it's the I believe called the final chapter or whatever, and he's got to save Aunt May, and he's got to stop the underground syndicate guys, and he's got to take the pictures for the newspaper, and I mean, all this stuff, but he's got to get to Dr. Connors to give the blood, to make the serum, to see if it's going to work. I mean, there's so much, and you're going, and we still have 10 pages to go. And then again, when he is all the way successful in these things and he loses Betty Brant because she can't have a guy, she doesn't know he's Spider-Man, but she sees all the bruises on him and says, you live too rough a lifestyle being an action photographer. I can't live with that because of what happened to her brother. And you go, God, you don't see that. Even today, I always forget that's coming, where they gut punch him at the end, and you're going, I remember that as a reader, go, he did all this, he gets no credit, his girlfriend leaves him for really a good reason. It scares her too much, and she warned him not to do this. But it's great. That's one book that would be a year by anyone else, but one book he could do it.
We can move on from the Spider-Man stuff, but there's
because I'm a fanboy. That's why I can talk about that.
This is the fun part, right? Like this is rereading these stories. I forgot how much I liked Betty Brant's character, where
me too.
She's like way more mature than he is, and she
Absolutely.
came from this dark background, and she's like, I don't want to repeat the past. Like you learn that she has this whole connection to the mob, and she lost her brother, like you mentioned. And while some of those stories are dramatic, like I'm not a fan of every time Liz Allen walks in the background and she's like, oh, that Liz Allen. But it's like,
I think Ditko nailed high school romance to adult romance.
Right.
The politics of high school are very different than the politics of paying your bills.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, what seems so important becomes trivial. And that was the journey that happened. That's clearly Ditko doing that. And I think that for the readers of that time, I mean, I laugh now when they say, well, now we're representing stories so people understand. I'm like going, everybody understood this. Everybody got it. These stories are absolutely timeless and oddly not dated at all when you read them. They could. I always thought, man, if I owned that franchise and had a streaming service, we're adapting from Spider-Man 1 up. We're just going to adapt these stories, and you would have the biggest smash hit ever. I mean, as good as Spider-Man is, it would really be what we all knew when you read these things. Because I always tell people, they'll say, well, did you like this thing with Spider-Man in the movie? And I go, yeah, they're fine, but it's never going to be anywhere close to the galaxy that was those first, I don't know, 35, 38 issues that Ditko did, and then subsequently on to Romita's great run. They're just not. I mean, that's what I know. And I can't ask someone, hey, go read the first, 50 comics. It's like they're not going to get that. So I still have my geek cred way above people who just like the visual interpretations in the movies. I'm like, oh no, you don't get to. You got to read these, and then you can tell me what you think.
I don't know. That's why I like the people who make this stuff, and their vision is way more important to me than the IP. Like Spider-Man on toothbrushes, don't want it. What Ditko wanted to do, give me that.
Yeah.
And it's like you've worked on, like, Batman is the character that you see on t-shirts and toothbrushes and everything. And it's like, it's people making this, like you see like a Batman movie every year. It's like there are people telling these stories that they come from somewhere. It's not just like a corporate.
I look at it as they can't be as eccentric as I can be, and they can't be as anachronistic or idiosyncratic or any of those types of terms. They can't do it. I'm the only guy In my world, those things don't exist. In my world, he is absolutely a horrific thing to the regular people. I never draw him thinking, what would a criminal, how would the Scarecrow or the Joker deal with him? They're insane, so they don't matter. He has to come up with ways to just stop him. But I always think in terms of the guy on the street, the regular guy, whether he's a criminal or a regular person, they'd be equally terrified of him. And I start from there. And that he doesn't reveal himself, and that he doesn't come out in the day. And that when he does, his first mission is to intimidate, not just beat the hell out of someone. After he's dealt with, like, regular criminals, they're idiots if they come up to him, because they don't know if he's a good guy or not. They have no idea what he is. That's how I go from, they put out the bat signal to warn people he's loose. And he's the worst of whatever, maybe, because they don't do it for the Joker or for the Penguin. They do it for this guy. And you only see him if he's fighting those guys. If they do it, it's turf wars. It's over control. It's not over righting wrongs. That's how regular people would be. They don't know this. We wouldn't. Why would we? So you have to forget the reader. You have to think the fictional in your head people who walk the streets of Gotham, which is a horrible city and a character unto itself. So he's got to be the worst thing in the worst city at all times, and rarely seen, if at all. But when he is, he gets what he wants 99% of the time. And that kind of draws itself. Realism is great, but interesting is better. And I always go for interesting. I want something interesting. I don't want to know how would it really be. I'm in comics. I want to know, I want to see something more broad, more played loud. I want something to the more edges of that rather than the reality. I don't care for the reality because I've got that already. So when I do mine, I tend to think of the emotion more than how many treads are on his boot. There we
I
are.
don't know. A lot of those Batman stories is like, why is this guy in bondage gear beating up mentally ill people? Like, why?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. See, and what I always used to think was the definition of their insanity was they kept going up against Batman.
Yeah.
That's why they're insane. That's how they prove they're insane. I never saw Bruce as a conflicted, twisted guy who had no. He does what he does because he's capable of doing it. He's got the drive to do it. He's completely normal in every sense, and he is the antithesis of these crazies. He doesn't sit there and dwell over his parents dying. He does not want other people's parents to die. It's his mission. I don't think you really need to delve more into Bruce. You need to delve more into telling a good story.
Speaking of making comics, are you still doing, I call it the old school way for the sake of brevity, like paper and ink, or do you do digital as well?
I do it on paper. Paper has more of a sincerity to me. I don't, if someone wants to work digitally and they get the results, that's great. But I want the potential for mistakes. I want the potential for that kind of odd magic to happen, where a loose sketch line may mean something more. I've had a lot of good stuff in my career happen from that, and I didn't find it. It was kind of removed from going that route. And also, I like comics to be still comic bookish. You can be whatever someone's style is, but there's something really cool about physically using ink on paper. Each brush is a little different, so you get a different, each pen nib is a little different. So you don't know. You have to go into it with that kind of, you don't know what's going to happen. That can be frustrating at times, but it can be wonderful. Generally it's wonderful. But I don't know. I haven't seen it. I haven't seen it. I guess the original intent was it would be quicker, but ultimately, the aesthetics aren't the same to me. And I've tried it, but I didn't like it more than what I was doing. It was fine, but it wasn't as fun as, and that's it, right? It's got to be fun. If you're reading comics, it's got to be fun. Doesn't matter if the story ends in disaster. It's got to be a fun ride to disaster. And the same with doing these. It's got to be fun.
Do you hang on to your original art, or do
Oh
you
yeah,
also?
yeah. I do because I like to go back and see what worked and what didn't. I can tell by physically looking at it. I mean, you can see the strokes. You can see the way a line was applied. Was it pulled or was it pushed? When did I apply a texture and when did I not? Did I work around things? Did I work into the dark or into the light? Sometimes you forget, and sometimes it's almost like you're in meditation when you're doing it. Sometimes you don't really think. Decisions don't come like, I'm going to do this. It's just like, I see it in my head. How do I get it on paper? And I'm not thinking that way. So that's a big part of just for my own personal technique. I like to look. I like to see what I got. I mean, thankfully I do, because they're going to reprint some of my Batman work, and I had done some stuff for it that I'd forgotten about that wasn't able to be used. They changed their direction in a and delayed some stuff, and eventually I forgot about it and they went on to other things. Now that they're doing it, they had asked me, do you have any extra stuff for this? And I said, let me go look. I think I have in my file, I think there's and I'd done for a reprint these end papers, like giant 2-page spreads that had nothing to do with having to be in the story or anything, just really cool stuff. Turned out to be wonderful, and I'd forgotten all about it. And so I'm glad I kept it.
It reminds me of what you were talking about, working on Deadman, where you look at the page and then you come back to it. It's like, oh, there's a take. It might take, you go to sleep and then you wake up the next day, or it'll take a few more years than that. Where it's like,
Yeah.
oh, hey, this actually could be applied here. This could actually, even if it's just a design element, has nothing to do with the story, we could still use
Yeah,
this.
I think what happens is you leave yourself open to that by not saying I'm going to go in and do the coolest whatever. What you do is you're going to say I'm going to do the most personal one and let that fall where it may. I think you were right when you earlier said it looked like an independent comic in that sense. It was, I guess. That's a good way to put it. I didn't think of it that way. I mean, I'm trying to do what I see, but ultimately I'm the guy. I go through this process where I go, oh, I got an idea. And then I put it on paper and I go, wow, that really looks good. And then I see it, get finished in the inking and stuff. And I go, well, I've nailed this. And then I see it published and I go, what the hell was I thinking? I go through that arc every time. Every time I look at it, I go, well, of course people are going to be upset. Look at those ludicrous ears. I always do that. I find it funny because I go, next time I'm not going to do that. And then I find myself next time doing exactly the same thing I always did before, because I began to realize there's two Kelleys. There's Kelley, the fan who I was telling about, who talks about Spider-Man 33, who loves comics and Kirby and all that stuff. And then there's the other one who goes into that state when he's working and then comes out of it thinking everything's great until he sees it published, where the Kelley who saw Spider-Man 33 goes, what were you doing? I have a doppelganger is what the term, I guess, is there's this other guy who draws the comics and he'll answer your questions, but he's a weird dude. So
It's like a comic book version of Mr. Hyde. It's just like
it is, but it's a really quiet, nice Mr. Hyde who just thinks he's not harming anything. He thinks he's doing fine, but it works. And ultimately, as to, like you said, with time, then when a little time goes by, I look at it and go, that's really good. Where did that come from? Because I don't control this. I don't think about it that way. I don't pre-design my work. I draw as I go. I read it and they say, this is what it is. I very rarely preliminary. I don't thumbnail. I don't do any of that. I want all of my energy to go directly into that panel. And I'll get it right. It'll come out right. In these kind of interviews, you can actually show what you mean. Like this, I completely forgot about this. And it's huge. I mean, they're huge. I don't know if you can see that very well. But that's an end paper. It's not in the comic. It's not telling the story. It's just, but that happened where I just had an idea that if I bought a big book, you know, I would want end papers. You know, if you're going to do that, but this is a lot of stuff that you do, and you how I forgot about it, I don't know. I'm glad I kept it. But those kind of things are fun. And to this, I mean, to that point, those are the things that I dug. And so I was thinking, well, other people will dig it. They didn't ask me to do those. Now that they're reprinting it, they're ecstatic I did them. And that's just the weirdness of being a comic book artist who's more of a fan, because as a fan, that's what I would want. I think I did it for Deadman too. I just thought, you know, what would be cool is if there was something when you open it, it's kind of in the old days when you went to go see a movie when I was a little kid and it was a big movie, they'd have what they called seating music, and they would play stuff from the film in a completely dark theater, letting people know it's time to get ready for this movie. And it set the atmosphere. That's kind of what I wanted was, well, you'll set the atmosphere for it. And also it's prestigious. I mean, it looks like, hey, we're doing something here. So I dig it. I mean, I'm lucky in that they still have me doing covers for Batman. I mean, I'm totally on board with the, you know, new people come on, you let them do their thing. So for me to be around is purely based on this eccentricity, I think.
What I love about the Deadman book is that it's like Kelley Jones Deadman.
Yeah.
You never see that. It's like writers get their name put on books first all the time. It's like if it happens like it I saw a Cockrum book. It was like
Mm-hmm.
the Starjammers collection or something, and it was like
Yeah.
Cockrum's Starjammers. It's like, wait,
Yeah.
why is that weird? Why is that weird to see? It's
Well, in
because
my
like they don't
case,
do that.
I think in my case, it's always the way, like it can go either way. Like Kelley Jones is Deadman, or hey, Kelley Jones is Deadman. Dave Cockrum, it's just, hey, here's something you may not have seen by the great Dave Cockrum. So it can work both ways. But I was always grateful for that, you know, that they would do that. I thought that it was the idea sometimes can trump everything else, because it's purely that based on an idea. It isn't technique. It isn't I'm, you know, some wonderful artist. It's this idea. Then it drew itself and it became that world. To this day, like you, I don't really, not because I love myself so much. It's not that. It's I can't see him a different way either. And when I've tried to do him the straight way, I just can't do it. One, it's Neil. I just see Neil's version, which is heroic and wonderful. But with me, I always see him as this terribly tragic character. And that is a big turn on to me. To, you know, when you're out of gas and you're tired or whatever, but you have the idea, there's a lot of juice you can get on a page that way. I'm just a big adherent to that. You know, when people ask me how you learn to do this or how you draw hand, I go, you just do it over and over. It'll come to you. Work on ideas. You know, work on seeing the world the way you see the world. Try to put it on paper. Don't try to do it like Jim Lee does. Don't try to do it like whoever your favorite artist is. Do it the way you see it, and you'll have a long career if that's what you choose.
Is there anything you're working on right now, or anything you want to
Yeah,
throw
I'm
out there?
just in fact I got the first graphic novel finished of 4 that I'm doing with Matt Wagner, and it's really a good story. So that I'm doing some stuff for DC, and like I said, I'm regular cover for Detective right now. So I'm pretty busy. I'm pretty busy. And the thing with Matt Wagner, we'll be able to announce that here pretty soon. But I think I'm always careful of saying it, but I think that's probably one of the best things I've been associated with. Just simply, Matt wrote an incredibly good comic or graphic novel.